Picture a company with a bunch of different revenue streams. Some of their sales are online, but some are in actual physical shops around the country. Some of the things they sell will get bought today, but some get bought weeks in advance. So that complicates the picture. All the data's in different third-party systems, plus a few spreadsheets that get updated at the end of the month, by hand. And your job is to get from that hodgepodge to a tech-centric business that has a real-time and accurate view of everything that's happening across the company. You've got to do it while the company is still operating, and you've got to do it during a pandemic. And if that weren't enough, you'll be starting completely from scratch. There's no in-house IT at all. Part of me thinks I'd relish the challenge, but I'd also be absolutely terrified. And today I am talking to Domenico Fioravante, who has spent the past 18 months doing exactly that, transforming the Therapie Medical Group with a bit of agile thinking and some Confluent Cloud. And I got the impression as we talked that he relished the journey the whole way. So before we start, let me tell you that the Streaming Audio podcast is brought to you by Confluent Developer, which is our site that teaches you everything you need to know about Kafka, from how to start it running and write your first app, to architectural patterns, performance tuning, maintenance, and more. Take a look at developer.confluent.io. And if you want to take one of our hands-on courses that are there to teach you more, you can easily get Kafka running using Confluent Cloud. Just sign up with the code podcast100 and we'll give you an extra $100 of free credit to get you started. And with that said, I'm your host, Chris Jenkins. This is Streaming Audio. Let's get into it. My guest today is Domenico Fioravante. Hi, Domenico.
All good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me here.
Pleasure. So, Dom, you are variously an entrepreneur, a developer, tech manager, and now you're director of engineering.
Yeah. I have a weird story, let's say. I have a weird trajectory because I started after my computer science degree as an entrepreneur, small entrepreneur in Italy, like with my own company, building custom software, web application in Java, something that was very common in 2000s. And I had this role for 11 years, and then I decided to go back to instead trying to be an employee. So probably the opposite of what many people do, but I'm pretty happy of the choice, I would say.
Yeah. But eventually you were pulled back into at least the high end of management, right?
Yes, I mean, the management was always my core. It's probably that's why I went back being a software engineer. But then, I did a trajectory, so I became a tech lead naturally, senior tech lead, engineering manager, and now I'm an engineering director.
Yeah, and so that brings us to today's story, if you will. You, in October 2020, which pandemic-y times, the world's beginning to close down, you make a leap to something called the Therapie Clinic.
Yes, it was definitely a crazy period, like still today it is, but at that time we were in full COVID times and lockdowns, and I decided to do a move because there was an interesting project for me. So I was hired as engineering director in Therapie Medical Group. Therapie was clearly known as a company working in the medical and aesthetic area since 20 years almost, so not a startup at all. And because of the trajectory of growth that the company was having in different direction, different businesses, and also because of the plan of growth for the future, the CEO decided at that time to invest in technology. And it was definitely a good choice. And he wanted to transform the company from a tech last to a tech first to help the company scale. I was hired as an engineering director, together with me, a CTO and a product director, and we were given the goal at the time to build an internal tech organization from scratch, from ground up. So definitely, for me, it was an amazing possibility because I could put in practice all the learning of my 20 years career in a real use case, which is something that doesn't happen very often. Normally, you join a company which is already there, right? Yeah, you help the company grow, but in this case, we're really starting from zero. We started from 3 people, and today we're almost 50 people in the tech organization. So today I would like to share the journey with all your audience.
So that's like a growth of 40 odd people in less than 2 years.
Yeah,
I
one
can see
year.
why that would appeal, especially given like it's almost an IT and management greenfield project, right? It's entirely
Yes,
your playground. But before we
yes,
get into that, give me an idea, because I don't know what the therapy clinic do, what the therapy group does. So if I'm a customer, what am I buying from you? Give me an idea of the
So
business on the
therapy,
ground.
yes, Therapie Clinic has different businesses. The one where the most known is our aesthetic and clinic. So we offer services in UK and Ireland, and today we have 75 plus clinics. We offer services like sculpt, skin laser hair removal, Botox fillers, all things that are definitely non tech and non appealing for for engineers. Um,
I know everyone
but
needs to wax from time to time, right?
yes, yes, that's true. That's true. I did some face treatment for free, so and it helps at a certain age. But yeah, definitely one of the struggle was that definitely is not a field that is appealing. Let's say for tech people. So this was one of the struggle, but we managed to overcome this by the offering a way of working that was very appealing for engineers. So going back to your question, so therapy has this area which is called Therapy Clinic, but there is much more. We have more businesses. One is Therapy Smile, so we offer teeth braces. One is
Okay.
called Oplace, where we do laser eye surgery, and we have 15 clinics or more and growing between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And there is a brand new business that we started in 2021, which is called Therapy Fertility. So we opened in 2021 the biggest Irish fertility clinic. So IVF sector, egg freezing, all these things that again I didn't know anything about at that time. But I mean, what was very appealing was definitely the trajectory of growth of the company, and in fact, the size of the company kind of doubled since I joined. We hired 800 people since I joined. We opened more, as I
Crikey.
told you, several clinics on top, and part of the trajectory of growth was the tech organization. So definitely a very nice situation to be if you're a tech person. Let's say you see
So
scale, right?
yeah, so you're in the situation where you've got lots of physical locations around the UK. Somebody, presumably on the other side of the business, is worrying about no end of medical training and legal issues, and presumably they're far too busy to think about the IT. So you come into what kind of situation technically?
So the situation was the typical situation that probably you've seen many times if you've been consultant, right? So a company which was non-tech, so every software was outsourced. So third-party software built for us by third-party company, software as a service, and worst case scenario was no software at all. So manual processes, especially in the reporting area, it's very common that when you have software that you don't control, it's hard to have an automated reporting because you have different sources, right? So especially in the reporting area, there was a lot missing. There was no software. There was manual processes, manual aggregation, spreadsheets, and this was done obviously manually, and all the reporting was coming end of the week, end of the month. And in a world which is definitely data driven, we know that data, they lose value the more you wait to read
Yeah.
them. So that's definitely one of the key area where we needed to intervene, let's say, and that's what happened actually.
Yeah, we often think here like that batch processes are a dirty word, but we're usually thinking automated batch processes. If people are actually manually compiling reports, that makes me shudder.
Yes, that's definitely the sensation I had when I joined. Right? But that's also cool. I mean, as engineers, as tech person, again, when we see a possibility, that's the moment where you're excited, right? Because it's too easy when you arrive and everything is there and you do small improvement. But this was really a greenfield, and you could see like so many things that you could improve because in this situation, your work has a big impact, has a huge impact, which is not always the case, right?
Yeah,
When we do our job, right?
yeah. It's highly visible, big challenge, and it feels like nearly everything you could do from that point would be an improvement, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, you cannot fail at the end because whatever you do, it's an improvement. I think the complexity there was more the communication, right? So if you work in a tech company, it's easy to communicate with the board, with the leaders, because they're more or less they're all tech or they have tech background. So it's easier to explain what you're doing and why it takes so long, or why there are delays, and what is the complexity of what you're doing. In this case, I mean, communication channel has to be different, like so definitely non-technical. So the communication channel is delivering value, I believe. So one of the key factor, and we knew that since the beginning, was not building the perfect, system of the words, the ideal one, which is always in our minds because that's what we would like to do. I mean, but you always have to. That's the role of an engineer, like put in a plate the ideal scenario versus what is the reality, what are the parameters of the environment, right? So we knew since the beginning that the key factor would have been try to deliver quickly value to the company to demonstrate them that they did a good choice in investing in us, right?
Right.
And that's why the way you implement the software, the technology you choose, the architecture you choose cannot be the ideal one. It has to be the right one all the time. So the right one was at the beginning simple. Go with the skills you already have in the team you're building. Because actually the other complexity is that we were building software while building the tech organization. So we were hiring teams, putting them together, and obviously you cannot have all the skills you need as soon as you hire people. You need to upskill. So the idea at that time was, even though in our mind was definitely the idea of introducing Kafka, just to connect to why we're here, right? Kafka and having a partner like Confluent was in my mind. I worked with Kafka in the past, and I definitely believe that when you build a tech organization, you need to keep in mind the famous Conway's law, which I always mention.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? Because as most of the audience probably know, I mean, Conway's law says that if you are an organization trying to to design a system, that is the final design that you will have will match the organization communication structure and team structure. I've been there before. It's always like that. So if you
So
work in a company with a monolith software, the company organization, it's a monolith. So it's a lot of dependencies, a lot of communication channels, because that's like that. When you want to deploy and code into a monolith, there are tons of communication that has to happen. There is a separate QA team. There is a separate deployment team, because that's the way it is. And then I worked in a company doing microservices in the pure way, not the distributed monolith. And the company was super agile. The teams were autonomous. They were able to deliver value super quickly to production. And so that law never failed. So that's why this was always in my mind, in our minds. So we had in mind the ideal architecture, the ideal scenario, the fact that Kafka could have been the backbone of our event-driven architecture, but we also knew that you cannot introduce such a big complexity at the very beginning, especially because you need to upskill also the people before that. So that's why we went very easy at the beginning, and we were able to build teams, and the teams were able to deliver value to production in 1 or 2 months. And then there was a moment where naturally we understood that we reached the critical sides of the tech organization, and we were able to then introduce Kafka and partner, as it happened with Confluent, to have a managed Confluent Cloud cluster.
Cool. So you're there. You're thinking you want to end up with a real-time reporting system. You're going to use Kafka, but if you arrive with an announcement of a 2-year project, then you're not going to last very long, right?
Yes.
So what was the first thing you built, and how did you put it together? Because did you start with, I'm going to deliver something in 2 months and then figure it out? Or did you start with, I'm going to build something small and how long will it take?
No, so we started, first of all, to identify the first focus. First focus, as probably you understood, it was the reporting area. Because again, if you don't have numbers, it's hard to plan anything else, right? So it's hard to also decide which are the priorities, like even in what software are you going to replace first, right? So definitely the first team was built in the reporting and data analytics area. So and the idea was already to be able to deliver quickly something, right? While ideally I would have introduced Kafka, so that, I mean, we would have, I think Kafka is an enabler, right? Because Kafka versus the standard request response paradigm, Instead, it helps you to build a system which is very decoupled, right? So if you free up the data from the third-party software that I mentioned, you publish on Kafka, this will you know that it will enable many other use cases, right? But it would have taken too long, right? So what we did is that we started building a team on this data reporting area, and we started going with an easy solution. So the easy solution was like going simple. We started building ETL pipelines on AWS. We used serverless technologies. Everything was managed. So we use AWS AppSync, like a managed GraphQL, to communicate with the third-party API and abstract.
That's the thing where you can like, it kind of reminds me of Kafka Connect in a way. It's like we can
Yes,
connect to your third party and present it as a GraphQL API easily. And you can
correct,
just
correct.
worry about chewing from that. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea is always obviously to try to build something that is reusable in the future. So GraphQL at that time gave us the ability to abstract from the third-party API, so the naming, the domain system, because we didn't want to rebuild something identical to what we had. So this was the reason, and also we went for a serverless, so managed GraphQL in AWS, because so we didn't have the burden of managing it. So, and then next step was like introducing, obviously, using AWS Lambda, schedule Lambda to batch call the third-party API and mine the data, produce the data on an S3 bucket, and then another AWS Lambda reacting to the S3 bucket event of file creation to do the transform and load. And the load was done in a Redshift instance, still on AWS, with a Looker as a BI tool on top of this. So what we did is that in a month, we had this pipeline, which was kind of mining transaction and sale data from the external system that we were using for transaction and booking. This system was used both in our call center and in our front of house, in all our clinics. So all the transactions were there. And we were able, in less than a month, really, to start building our first dashboards in Looker. So Redshift was our warehouse database. We built the star schema on Redshift, and the data analysts that we hired in the meantime were able to already build the first dashboard. And those dashboards, I cannot say they were real time because we still depend on a third-party system. So our Lambdas were scheduled once an hour. But from the situation that we found when we arrived, which means reporting at the end of the week and at the end of the month, to have an aggregation of all the clinics numbers, let's say, we were able to deliver dashboards that were 1 hour late, worst case scenario, which, I mean, again, like talking about big results, there was an amazing change for the company. And the company already saw, okay, so these guys, they know what they're doing. And they started using those, all the board, all the managers of the company starting using those numbers to take decision, which is really amazing. And it happened
especially in this kind of time when you need to adapt more than ever, right? The past couple of years, business-wise, you need to make those decisions faster and larger than I think we've ever had to.
Correct. Like, I mean, COVID is an amazing example, right? So I think the complexity for us tech manager is not building software. I mean, at all. Like we know how to build software, right? I mean, we know you hire good people and they will build software. The complexity is build an organization that is able to build software at scale, and it's very agile in change the direction if needed. Again, like now we go back to the 2 years plan. I mean, if you do a plan of 2 years, but the world changes in 2 months, like it happened with COVID. So with COVID, the companies that were able to move fast and change the direction fast, for example, company without an e-commerce, like they had to close their shops and start selling quickly. And the company that weren't able to do this very fast, they just closed, right? That's why, again, in this kind of world, the idea is that you need to build an organization which is able to build and deliver quickly software at scale, and eventually be also able to change direction if needed pretty quickly. And this is feasible if you do, like, again, continuous delivery, pure CI/CD if possible, small batches, quick feedback loop from the business to validate what you deliver. That's the secret sauce. I don't think that the problem is building an e-commerce. We did it many times. It's not building, again, a data pipeline. We've been there. The problem is building an organization that is able of doing that well, let's say, at scale.
Yeah, it's that. I think it's sometimes that ability to step back and see beyond the deliverable to the slightly bigger picture, getting that organization right.
Yes, I think what we should always have in mind is that the delivery in the short term and the big picture, right? That's the role of our tech manager. Again, I say it again. There is always a balance that you have, a trade-off that you have to make. You need to deliver value. That's what you have to do. I mean, there is, again, I'm not a big fan of delivery date, right? I mean, everyone knows working with me because, but I know that the real business, they need dates. They need to know what happens, right? So that's why what you always need to have in mind the big picture, the plan, the long-term plan. But you also know that this long-term plan probably will change, and delivering quickly and small batches will make you able to change the plan if possible, because the business will come to you and tell you, yeah, we say that this is the priority, but now we have another priority, so switch.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to do that. We cannot say, oh, no, guys, we say that, now we need to finish this. No, it doesn't make sense. That's why whatever you build has to have this in mind. Like, so be abstract enough to have in mind to the final goal, the long-term goal, but also be realistic enough to be able to change the plan if the plan change, the business plan change.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of balance that between, I suppose at the extremes you'd say waterfall and agile, right? You've got waterfall, big, long-term goal, and you try and bite it all off at once and you fail. And I think agile, if it has a fault, sometimes it's so focused on delivering something quickly that it doesn't have a long-term vision.
Yes, correct.
It doesn't know where it wants to go, right?
Correct, perfectly. I think you definitely nailed it. So waterfall, we've been there. It doesn't work. We all know, right? So it's impossible to decide now and have all the details of what we're going to do in the next year. And especially whenever you're going to deliver, whatever you deliver is not what you need, because everything has changed, right? So definitely it makes sense, the agile approach. But again, like going back to the agile, you need to know that all the choices that you make, and sometimes they are building a tech debt, right? That's what we did actually, right? Going back to our example before, we knew that we were building a tech debt, but we know that it was the best thing to do in that moment. So building a dedicated pipeline in Python on serverless, specifically to deliver value and quickly have reporting dashboards, almost real time. That was the main goal. But in our backlog, the backlog of the team, actually, there was already an epic saying, okay, we need to migrate this to Kafka. It was already there. And we all knew this would have happened. It was in our minds, because obviously while the pros of the decision we made was like, okay, we were quickly in prod, we used the knowledge that the team had, we quickly had feedback from the business that was the right thing to do. But obviously the cons is that while we were doing an effort of freeing up data, which means mining data from the third-party system, but we were using the data only for one use case, right? Because you have a dedicated pipeline. So let's say another scenario of another use case that wants the same transaction data, we would have needed to build another dedicated pipeline. So we were not really freeing up the data, because every use case needed another pipeline, dedicated pipeline to do something, right?
So you've got a dedicated but quick pipeline for every single thing you're doing.
Yes, which means,
yeah, I see the problem.
I mean, you have to maintain 50 pipelines, and again, if there is a change, you need to change all of them. Obviously, we knew that this was tech debt. It was pretty clear, but sometimes, again, you have to do the right thing, not the perfect thing, and that was the right thing to do at the moment, while having in mind the fact that we know this is not the final solution, because otherwise we'll have to maintain 50 pipelines, right? Just to give an idea, one of the scenarios, the next use case was like, for example, we have offline business, which are the clinics. We also have an online business, because we have an e-commerce, obviously, where customer can buy product, buy services, and also book appointments, right? But most of our business is on offline, 85% at the moment, probably less with COVID, but which means that, for example, for our Facebook marketing campaign, we weren't using the offline data, right? We were using only the online data, because we have obviously a Facebook pixel in our website, which is like sending data to Facebook, and then marketing people were using those to target customer with marketing campaign. But we weren't using offline data, right? Which is most of our
Which is
customer
most of your
experience,
data.
right?
Yeah.
So what we were doing is spending a lot of money on marketing campaign because we were targeting everyone, right? Because we were not sending the behaviors of 85% of our customers. So a lot of money with small result. So one of the needs, another of the many needs we had was like to use transaction data coming from offline behaviors to feed Facebook API so that the marketing people can then use those information to target 100% of our customers because we have 100% of behaviors or non-target them maybe, right? So exclude them from the targeting maybe. So this
Yeah.
was another use case. So in this use case, what did we had to do to build another pipeline, mining the data and then sending it to Facebook, right? So that was the moment where we understood, okay, probably because then in the meantime we already arrived to being three teams, three development team.
Okay.
And so we said, okay, that's probably the moment where, because if we had the transaction data in a Kafka topic, instead of rebuilding another pipeline dedicated to the Facebook, we could have just add a Kafka consumer on that topic, which would have just then spoken to the Facebook API. Again, Kafka is an enabler. Once you have data in a topic, this will enable different teams to consume them. So there will be probably one team owning the data, but then other team can consume. And we know, right, in Kafka, who consume, producer doesn't know about the consumer, doesn't need to know because Kafka scales if you need. So, and that's the beauty of it. And again, this is definitely a scenario where we started understanding, okay, probably is the moment where we need to introduce Kafka and use it as an enabler, right?
Yeah. To get a unified picture that you can then read from for all these different purposes.
Correct.
Do you know, I like the idea that you're sitting there in the office and the business people are thinking, this is great. We've gone from a week or a month to an hour. And you're thinking this isn't nearly good enough.
Correct. That's yeah, but again, it's hard to explain, right? But that's our role. That's our tech manager is the one that has to translate complexity into a different language to be able to have the business understand, because the business has to understand. And I think another key factor here is communication. Again, like the short feedback loop allows you to communicate quickly the status of where you're at, right? So while if you say, okay, we're gonna be ready in a year, and you'll be never ready in a year because you'll probably fail and be 2-3 months late. If you deliver continuously, you're also able to continuously communicate the status where you are. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's important. While we know that dates are just dates, are guesstimates, because there are so many unknowns that can happen when you build software. But if you're able to communicate quickly and give a status update very often to the business, you can tell the business early if you're late, so the business can adapt to that situation.
Yeah.
You cannot arrive 1 month before the deadline or 1 week and say, okay, sorry, we're late 2 months. So that's another part which is very important by using this kind of approach.
So yeah, so you're basically doing it on both sides, right? You're worrying about real time data, but also real time person to person feedback within the business.
Correct.
Ah,
Correct. Correct.
you've soaked this right into your bones. I can tell.
Yes, I mean, again, like when you start from zero, it becomes like your baby, right? And personally, again, like probably many of us, I really like what I'm doing, and this is probably the secret sauce
That goes a long
of
way.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, someone say that you'll never work a day if you like what you're doing, and definitely, I like a lot what I'm doing. It's good also to see that all that you've learned in the past, when you put it in practice, I mean, you do some errors still, but you see it working, because definitely the journey that we had was the right one. That's why, I mean, I'm very happy of sharing this with you and your audience, because I think there are other people who probably be in a similar situation and will do similar errors and similar learnings.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of people would want to be in that situation too. It's quite a journey. So
Yes.
So here you are, you've got a number of custom built pipelines. You want to get to Kafka. What's the point? What do you do to prepare for the move over? And when do you
Yeah.
know it's the right time to say, okay, we're biting the bullet?
Good question. So, uh, let me tell you a bit more about what we did at the beginning. So at the beginning, we started building those teams, which are so-called stream aligned. I like to mention many times the book Team Topologies. I mean, I'm not getting any money from them, but it's an amazing book.
I've heard a few big
That
books.
says a
It's
lot of
difficult
things.
to read it.
Yeah, it says a lot of things that probably I already knew, but it's good to read on paper from people that had similar experience to mine. So we started building so-called streamlined teams. So team focus on delivering value. So the streamlined team, they're long living, first of all, because in software teams has to be long living. A team has to own an area or a domain of the business. They need to be the master of this domain to be able to deliver in that area, because knowledge of the domain is part of what you have to know to be able to build software, right? So what we started doing at the beginning, building only those kind of team. Those teams as inside, they have inside all the skills needed to build software from the beginning to the end. So product manager, an engineer, which is a tech lead, other engineer, back-end or front-end based on what they're doing, designer, if there is front-end work, and also data analyst, because we're also trying between all these to implement a distributed data mesh paradigm shift, as as I've seen. And Kafka again comes back because this was in our mind that Kafka would have enabled us to do that. Okay, so that's what we did. So the first three teams, they were streamlined, delivering value, going easy, trying to minimize the number, the DevOps and platform for work needed, because that's something obviously that gives you additional burden if you want to deliver software. Once we reached the three team size, we started understanding that there were a lot of things that were cross teams, right? So there were a lot of ownership that was like cross teams. So we understood that was the right moment to invest building an internal platform or DevOps team, let's call it. There are many names. Right. So we started hiring the first platform DevOps engineer. And so now we started having someone that could be an owner, an entity that could be owner of something that was cross-team, like Kafka cluster or Kubernetes cluster, just to give another example, which is not Kafka related. So that was really the moment, because we understood that every team was doing a lot of DevOps work. While I believe that every engineer needs to have a DevOps background as well, because that's the way you are able to deploy to production and without having to depend on a separate deployment team. But when this DevOps burden becomes too much versus the development part, I think that's the right moment where you need a team that can remove this burden, take ownership, and be enabler of the streamlined team by owning the cluster, working on infrastructure as code templates or best practices, and so on and so forth. So that was the moment where we started building the team. And that was also the moment where we started doing a small spike on trying to understand what was the best choice for us between having a totally managed by us Kafka cluster, going with Amazon MSK, or going with Confluent Cloud. Right? So we did a spike. The senior engineer, the platform engineer, they did a deep investigation, trying to compare plus and minus of the different solution. Definitely, we discarded the entirely managed Kafka cluster since the beginning, because again, that's something we couldn't afford. I mean, we had a one-person platform team. You cannot manage a Kubernetes cluster, a Kafka cluster on your own with such a small platform team, right? So otherwise, the other solution would have been, okay, guys, wait, we build a 4 or 5 people platform team, and then in 6 months we start again. We arrived to have a critical mass of development teams. So we had 3 teams, and we started feeling the need, as expected, let me say, of having a dedicated platform team to be able to have an entity could take ownership of the increasing DevOps and infrastructure work that was needed, and remove it from the team to make them even faster in delivering, right? So we started investing in that, but again, we couldn't invest to have a fully fledged platform team, because again, we go back to cost and time and all those variables that you need to take into consideration. So we started hiring the first senior platform engineer, and with his help, we started investigating, doing a spike on which was the best solution to go for to have a Kafka cluster up and running quickly. Yeah. So we discarded since the beginning to have a fully managed by us Kafka cluster, because of the reason I said above. We don't have a fully fledged platform team. So we started investigating which was the best choice between Amazon MSK, Confluent Cloud, standard, or dedicated cluster. We did a very deep investigation. a long list of criteria involving senior engineers in the company as well, because obviously this would have been a choice that would have influenced our next year or two probably. So
Everyone has to
having
buy
this,
into it, right? Yeah.
yes, correct. And we also involved at that point Confluent. So we started meeting with some of Confluent people to help us also in this decision by giving us some more information, having a test cluster just to be able to go and test and see what are the limitations or not. So the list of criteria were like setup time and cost, maintenance cost, limitation, security, availability, migration costs, Kafka version update frequency, observability, and monitoring in general. So definitely a lot of different criteria. Plus, obviously, the cost, and the cost was not only the cost of running the cluster based on our throughput and how much data we were having on Kafka, but also cost in terms of resources, which is probably the highest cost in IT, right?
Yeah.
That's something.
Nothing's more expensive than people, right?
Yes, that's something I always discuss. I mean, trying to save money like 1,000 a month on something, and then that engineering costs, resources are the one that costs more, right? So I think it's very important there when you try to go with the super cool decision of managing everything on your own, which is fancy, right? Idealistic, let me say, because it's you can have control, looks like great, but then if you need 4 or 5 people, man, that's an amazing amount of money like that you're spending every year on resources. You're spending $500,000 just to have a team that then can manage something for you. While instead, I
Yeah.
would say that in our situation was perfect because we didn't have that ability. So it was pretty an easy choice to go for something managed again. So that, and again, after doing this investigation, let's say that I would say that mainly even the cost factor helped us deciding, because the two solutions were similar in a sense, but on the cost side, especially talking about resources, the Confluent Cloud was the best choice for us, and also the dedicated one because of some of the limitation of the standard classes. So we wanted a dedicated cluster. So that's why we went for Confluent Cloud dedicated cluster, and we were able, like in some minutes, as soon as we decided to have a production environment, test environment, cluster up and running, and we were able to start producing and consuming pretty quickly. So again, we invested a lot. I have to say, we invested a lot of probably a month on this decision again
Okay.
because of the importance of it. So it was a lot. I mean, again, and you can imagine like platform people, maybe they push for something they want to manage. So it's always try to find a balance and try to do always the right choice. Again, I have a technical background. I have to say I'm not a fan on any technology, even though I like Kafka. Clearly, that's probably very clear. But I think this shouldn't influence our decision. Our decision has to take into consideration all the factors, and we should do always the right choice for the people that are paying us, not for us or because we like the technology. I think this is fundamental. So that's why we invested a lot on this decision. And I think after I think we started with Confluent Cloud mid 2021, and now definitely we're pretty happy of the choice because the cluster is there, up and running. We had never a problem. We don't have to worry about updates and all the rest. What we do is just we produce and consume. We have our own now we have our own Kubernetes cluster where we run our Kafka streams and Kafka Connect applications or clusters.
Yeah.
So I have to say that I'm very happy of the choice.
Good. It's like infrastructure is one of those things that you want to just not trouble you, right? It's like you don't want to manage your own water pipes. You don't want to have to think about how water gets into your house. You just want to use the water.
Yes, correct. So sometimes again, like, and I've been there in the past. Sometimes we try to do the things that are more interesting, right? And again, like in this case, probably running our own class would have been more interesting. But then the reality is something different, right? In this case, why are we reinventing the wheel? Why we need to build in-house, knowledge and hire people that are just dedicated to run something, while the most complex stuff is that it's understanding our domain and build in the domain. So deliver value in that domain. Our focus is not to learn how to run a Kafka cluster. Our focus is like how to build, front of house software, call center software, how to do dedicated reporting, real-time reporting, how to apply machine learning to our data in order to get insights. So that's the focus we should have. And again, and again, in a sense, I would say that we are lucky that in our situation we were kind of forced, because we were forced to look at the reality of the things. Like, again, and also we are not, even though Therapie Medical Group is a very successful company, but we're not Facebook, we're not Google, we don't have huge amount of money that we can spend, which makes you a better engineer, I would say, because then you need to take into consideration money in all the equation you do, and I think that's important.
Yeah. Weirdly, some of the worst companies I've worked for have too much money, and it results in a
Right.
complete lack of focus. I mean, it sounds like a nice problem to have, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes a few constraints actually make you do more valuable things, because that's all you can do. You only have the choice to do something useful. You don't have the luxury of
Exactly.
doing everything. You know?
Exactly. I
So,
definitely agree.
not that I ever complain about them having too much money to give me a raise, but
Yeah, it's good to have the right
so
money. I mean, let's say.
yeah, the right amount and the right technology,
Yeah.
and just it's all about fine tuning those decisions. So there you are.
Yes.
You've got your Kafka cluster up and running.
Yeah.
How did you do? I'm assuming, knowing you by now, you didn't do a big bang migration.
No.
What
Obviously.
what did you do?
No, you know me very well. No. We proceeded by step as usual, right? Because again, we were in the meantime hiring more people, upskilling people a lot. Something we didn't say. I mean, please invest in learning and development all the time. In Therapie, we have a budget of, I can say it's not a secret, 1,500 per person per year, and I definitely believe this is another of the key factor. Make sure that not only you create an environment where it's good to work, but make sure that your engineers, or any people, I mean, are always upskilled. Like, my mantra is that all the engineers that work for you should be able to go tomorrow on the market and find 3-4 jobs in a week. But then you have to make sure to build a place of work where they don't go out and look for something else because they like it. So that's definitely
Yeah,
important. So again, we continued investing in upskilling the people to onboard, for example, in this case, Kafka knowledge and all the Kafka environment, let's say, knowledge. So what we did, going back to that example, which is only one of the things we did, so the data pipeline, what we did is that, okay, we started from that pipeline. We knew that in the backlog we had this tech debt to remove, and we wanted to move the pipeline into Kafka. So what we did is that we still continued using GraphQL to interact with the third-party API. Schedule Lambda to do the mining of the data, because that's definitely an easy choice. But then instead of using S3 and then another Lambda, with the Lambda mining the data is now publishing into a Kafka topic,
right.
like the raw data into a Kafka topic. So this is the extract part, right? And then we added the Kafka Streams application to do the transform. So consuming from the raw data, in this case, transaction data, into transforming that and publishing in other topics where the transformed data. And then we had the Kafka Redshift sync connector to sync into Redshift. So to do the load part of the thing. So we removed most of the dedicated pipeline to instead publish all the data into topics. And then we used a sync connector for the end goal, which is syncing on Redshift, which is one of the use cases. But then by introducing Kafka, the data finally can be mined only once from external system, but made available through topics to be consumed by any other team for any other use case, right? Again, without
Right.
depending on a
So you've
certain
kept
team or
the same two ends, but now you've got this Kafka pipeline in the middle that opens up all these other readers.
correct. And here now we go back to the example I was telling you before. I mean, and that's only one of the example. Like now, one team, a different one from the one that built the pipeline, was able to consume transaction data to feed Facebook API. Again, close to real time, let's say 1 hour at worst after the transaction happened. And we were able at this point to start building focus marketing campaign on Facebook by, again, saving lots of money because we were able to target better. And this is only one of the use case, right? So I can tell you more than one, because we knew that was the moment where we really Kafka demonstrated to be a real enabler. Because there was, for example, another team working on the booking system. They were able to consume appointments almost real time, to be able, for example, again, while the appointments and the booking system was still an external system, third party that we are replacing at the moment, we still don't own it. But by mining appointments and putting them on Kafka, that team was able to consume them and do almost real time actions, trigger action, which could be, message confirmation, schedule an appointment reminder, on different channels to drastically reduce the no-show rate, for example. So again, even though we still don't own the booking system that we're still rewriting in-house, but we, by mining data and making them free, in Kafka, we're able to already add value, because no-show is in a company like ours where we do, we have appointments in the clinics. No show is like, I don't know the numbers, but I know it's a lot. So being able, and we were dependent on the third-party booking system, which has limited functionality in order to reduce no shows. But because now we have the appointments which are on Kafka, we can define any kind of behavior. So like, again, we can schedule WhatsApp messages, we can send email, we can send SMS, we can trigger, a scheduled message one day before the appointment to make sure that there is like a reminder and all the rest. This is another scenario, for example. Yeah. And I'll tell you another scenario that in the meantime, there was another scenario we didn't even know at the beginning. So the company, because of the big scale that was, the scale that was becoming, decided to introduce an enterprise ERP system, which was definitely a blocker for our growth. What's the problem then? If you have an ERP, or you feed transaction manually, or you have to feed automatically, right? So, and in our case, obviously, the tech team was involved to build something that was able to feed the ERP with real-time transactions without having manual effort to do manual effort. And there was an additional use case that was like was not known when we started, because this was not in the plan. But again, going back to what we said before, the plan changed. The decision was made. Well, the tech team was there, and not only, but also the data was there, because we have, by having already the sales transaction of Kafka, the team working on the ERP integration now is able to transform on the format that the ERP needs. Obviously, it's a SAP ERP, so you can imagine SOAP protocol. So definitely we need to do transformation. But the good thing is that this team can consume a transaction almost real time and feed the ERP automatically. So again, This was a scenario not known at the beginning, and but all the work we did without knowing it, but definitely we expected that, was enabling that use case, and we didn't have to implement another dedicated pipeline in order to work on this new scenario.
Yeah, so it sounds like the unifying thing for both of those is if you can build these features, you've got the people able to build the features, but there's no way of doing that until you actually own the data.
Yes, I think that's the key point of this, right? So we are in a journey of replacing external software by rebuilding in-house, right? So, and again, going back to what we said at the beginning, one option would have been, okay, guys, leave us alone for a year or two, and then we're gonna come back with the software that delivered. But I mean, that's nonsense, right? So what we're doing now instead is like, first of all, take ownership of the data, which is, I believe, the secret, right? If you own the data, even if you don't produce them, at the moment we don't produce them, but we are freeing them. We can already deliver value and unblock the company in doing different things. In the meantime, we have 5 teams. Now we have 5 development teams. We are rebuilding the software in-house, right? And let me say also something else, like Kafka in this case and Confluent is not only enabling us different use cases, but probably you've been there before, right? So building software from scratch, it's easier than migrating from an existing software to another one, and rebuilding in-house.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is a work of having those 2 software in production at the same time and migrate the data, and all this has to happen without any impact on customer, internal and external customer. We know, right?
It's like a Hollywood film where someone's trying to jump from one bus to another as they're both moving along the highway.
Yes, that's a good metaphor. So it's easier to build software from scratch, from zero, ground up, startup, then replace something, especially if you don't own it. We are not replacing an internal monolith that we own and we have control of the monolith, so we can do some tricks, dual writes and things like that. We are replacing a software we don't own. So Kafka, and again, this was in our mind since the beginning, the fact that Kafka is there, and now even if we don't produce the data, but we freed them and we can consume them. Kafka, I know that it will help us a lot in the phase of migration from one system to the other, right? Because what we're doing now is that we are building the new system. So we're replacing the booking system, the front of house software, the e-commerce platform. And we know that there will be a moment where we'll have to do kind of dual writes, right? So write to the old system, intercept, write to the new system, do a validation, and then there will be a moment where we will shift the master of record from the old system to the new system we've built. Yeah. And Kafka in the middle, Kafka topics and connectors will help us in this process 100%, right? Because you can intercept event and have them real time feeding your system, vice versa. You can be the one master of record and then send to still feed the old system for a certain period of time. So again, not only enablers of features, but definitely having an architecture like that will help us in the path of replacing those external systems.
Yeah. And you've massively broken down the size of the migration by freeing the data first and then worrying about what to do with it.
Correct. And there is also another step that we did after that. So again, as I said, we need to replace those systems. So there is a moment where you need to become the master of records, right? So we need to become the source of truth, right? If you read book about software architecture, migrating from monolith to microservice, there is always this kind of dual write moment where we write into system. And then there is a moment where you switch which is of the two the master of record. Where do you read from? So you do dual write and you read from the old system. When everything is fine, is validated, your internal system becomes the source of truth, right? And that's a key moment. That's why the next step in this example that I'm using, one of the many, what we did is that we added another component to the pipeline, which is in this case DynamoDB. It could have been any other database. In our case, obviously, we are on AWS, so clearly we use Dynamo. Mm-hmm. So we had two problems. So one is that now we're mining data from an external system, and by mining data, we call APIs that gives us information, right? Those information are not tracking deletes, right? Because you just say, oh, give me all the appointments from here, this date to this date. And you get the appointments. What happens when appointment gets deleted? And again, going back to the fact that you have to schedule a reminder and all that, you need to know if an appointment is deleted. So this API was not giving us deletion, right? So what we did is that we introduced Dynamo so that we have an internal master of record that we can compare to. So what we do now is that the schedule Lambda mining the data is no longer publishing directly to Kafka, but is writing in DynamoDB.
Okay.
And then we've chosen DynamoDB because there is Dynamo Streams, which is like part of Dynamo, one of the Dynamo features that you can enable, and we'll do kind of change data capture for you, right?
Okay,
and
right.
Publish in a stream. So that what happens is that as soon as when we mine data, we compare with what we have in Dynamo, and we can understand updates and deletion as well. So that on Kafka, instead of publishing the raw data, we can publish events. So what happens? So create new appointment, updated appointment, deleted appointment, and so on and so forth. So that's why we needed to introduce this middle layer, which is definitely very interesting, because now we have the ability of understanding what's happening, right? So through using a change data capture system, which is a very common approach when you use Kafka. Transforming the state doing event sourcing essentially. Yeah. So transforming the fact that you have a state, so losing a lot of information instead, and moving to have events, the events that will bring you back to that state. So that's why we did this decision. And again, I think it's another very successful pattern, because we now have much more information that we can react to, like deletion event, for example, but also now we have also a master of record inside the company, even though we are not the producer. So we have a DB where we have all the appointments, for example.
Yeah.
And we can and again, this will help us in the path of replacing the booking system.
You end
So
up
this was
knowing more than your third-party provider knows about your business because you've captured more of the information, right?
correct,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, the third-party system, for some reason, for historical reason, they don't track deletion, so they don't have this information. While now we have, so we actually have more data than they have, which I
Yeah.
think it's pretty cool.
It's funny. It's one of my favorite use cases of event sourcing, where you capture what the customer tried to do and failed. Instead of just throwing that information away, it's an absolute goldmine of where your business is almost making the sale, right?
Yes, exactly, 100%. But imagine, I'll give you another use case, which is very important. For example, like appointment is definitely a typical scenario, but transaction, right? We're mining transaction from this system, and you expect that the transaction is immutable, right?
Yeah.
A sale transaction. So if you have to give back money to a customer, you do a refund. But the system you're using has a special feature which can be unlocked by a manager that can modify a transaction, a sale transaction, like something by definition immutable. So ideally, we have a transaction, we read 100, Chris spent $100, and then a manager goes there and changes 100 to 80. So something that by definition is immutable, and again, like that you should use to feed an ERP. In this case, because we don't have control, it's not our software, could mutate.
Yeah.
That's where the DynamoDB, the first implementation with Dynamo came from, because while mining the data, we discovered that there was a discrepancy between our reporting and the third-party software reporting. And then we discovered that some managers, that were, for some reason, I mean, I'm not saying that there is not the right reason, but they were doing an error. They were just, instead of doing a refund, they were modifying the transaction just to be quicker, maybe, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but this then happened that instead of having the right transaction in our system, we had the wrong one, right? So that's why the need of having a master of record to be able to compare to. And then as soon as we introduced Dynamo, we were able to track and update transaction event and produce it through Dynamo streams into Kafka. So then we were able to update the whatever the end consumer of this information. So definitely, yes. I mean, this is a pattern which is, I think it's no value. Like, it gives you so much. As you were saying, you have more insight that the place where the data is generated.
Yeah. That kind of insight. It's something you only realize is valuable once you can actually see it, right? There was one thing, going back to Conway's law, there was one thing I wanted to know. As you've you've got this system now where you're splitting up producers and consumers, and you can separately worry about getting the data into Kafka and how you read it later. Has that kind of Conway's law changed the way you structure your teams at all?
So I think that the Conway's law has always been in my mind, because again, back to what I was saying before. So in order to have teams that can move quickly and deliver quickly, they need to have few dependencies, right? So you cannot have they cannot depend on another team if they have to test something, or if they have to deploy to production, or if they have to consume something. They cannot wait or ask, "Oh, can you expose an API for me because I need to do that?" And that's very common even in old approach in microservice architecture, where request response was the pattern. Synchronously consuming APIs was a thing, right? It was very common, right? But I've been there, and then I know that then a team was like waiting for another team to expose some information if they weren't there, right? Or not only that, but the team that is exposing and owns the API needs to know that you are consuming, because then they have to scale. Because if you have 10 teams consuming the same API, or you're bombing the API, they need to be able to know that and to scale, right? So this creates dependencies between teams. So, and again, like Conway's law says, I mean, you need more communication channels, you need more meeting, you need the team waiting for the other team, and everything moves slower. Like Kafka, instead, is an example where really the design of your architecture matches the communication channels and how many communication or dependencies there are between teams. Because again, in this case, where if you expose an information, you can be the producer, or in this case, mining it and producing it. But the teams that have to consume it, they don't have to go back to the owner team to tell them, oh, can you? I'm consuming. Be aware. I mean, there are teams that they don't know. I mean, that other team are consuming, because I mean, all the information are in the topic, and then everything consumes what they need and transform them in their own view of the data, right? So they don't produce it; they create their own view of the data of what they're interested in. So again, definitely the Conway's law has been always in my mind since day zero, because of this. I mean, this maniac idea of that, because I've been in places where it was so hard to deliver because of all those blockers. Like, and this created an environment where, first of all, I mean, the company is not good for the company at all, because you're very, very slow and in delivering. But also, it's not good for the people. It's not a place where you like to work, right? And then you risk you have a high retention problem, because people, if they, I mean, engineers, if they don't like what they do, they leave. It's like that. I mean, we're lucky because we're in a world where we have a lot of options, we have a lot of choices. So I think it's important to make sure. I mean, first of all, we need to do things which are good for the company, but the way of working that is good for the company is also a good way of working for the engineer. Because if you're very close to production, if you're able to deliver quickly, if you're able to have an impact, and you can see the impact on the company, that's the way most engineers want to work, in my opinion. I want to work like that. So I know that most of the engineers, they want to work in this way.
One of the great joys of programming is when you actually put what you've built into the hands of someone who isn't technical, and they're using it, and they're like, this is changing the way I live and work.
Yes.
That's something you want as a programmer, which you can't define in technology.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So that's why, going back to my idea, that was, for me, it was like a mantra: be able to build something like that, because this would have made also people happier. Like, again, going back to what I was saying before, we are not Google, we're not Microsoft. For us, we need to invest in being able to retain people. Like, first of all, offering them an environment where is nice to work with. In my opinion, is the secret. Money is important, for sure. You have to pay people the right amount, but also offering them a place where they can learn, evolve, have an impact, I think is fundamental, together with salary, to be able to hire people and retain people. And again, in this case, the fact that you don't depend on 3-4 teams whenever you have to go to production, right? You don't have to wait or hand over your work to someone else, which will deploy for you nighttime, maybe, and maybe the only moment where you get pinged again is when there is a problem in production, right? And you get pinged for something that was deployed together with some other changes of someone else, and you don't know what to do. What you want to do is that, being the one deploying to production, being the one fixing, monitoring what's happening, and eventually fixing the work you've done. That's the best way of working for an engineer. Yeah. And again, it matches the best way of working, which gives more result to the company.
Yeah. No one wants to be woken up at 3 a.m, but if you're deploying the software that risks waking you up at 3 a.m, you've got that feedback loop where you're making sure it's high quality software.
Correct. Yeah. That's exactly the point. Like why I believe that if you are the one deploying, the quality of your work will be much more, because you have. If you are, I've been there in the past. If you have to hand over your work to someone else, at that point you say, I mean, my commit will go to production with probably under 20, 30 commits, and they probably break my code. Who knows? Like that's what was happening with monolith work. Like, so 2 or 3, 4 or 5 teams writing in the same repo, and then QA team testing it, and a platform team deploying it. So like, I was there. I remember my work was not quality work at that point, because I didn't care. I really didn't care. Right?
Yeah.
While instead, when I worked in place,
yeah. I mean, you can get lazy when the problems are somebody else's. But also, if you don't get lazy and you want to keep your software high quality, you simply don't have the feedback you need to know what high quality software is.
That's true.
And again, it boils down to, so much of this boils down to tightening our feedback loops.
Yes, correct. So in this case, not having the idea of what's happening, I mean, of the impact of your work into production, I mean, it's very hard to understand if you're doing well or not. In our case, I mean, every
Yeah.
team has ownership of the feature toggles, A/B testing. So everything is inside the team. Whenever you go to prod, there is a part of the team which is then monitoring what's happening, conversion rates are changing,
Yeah.
what's the impact of your change. And then there is a quick feedback look inside the team saying, okay, this change looks like it has a good impact. Let's open the feature toggle to the entire traffic. This has to happen inside the same team. I mean, that's the only way of doing this quickly. I mean, the knowledge is all there. Why should you delegate someone else outside? And again, like that's why I think it's fundamental. And in this case, Kafka building an architecture that allows you to build teams in this format, right? And vice versa. Again, Conway's law is bidirectional, right? So if you
Yeah.
do wrong something here, you will have an impact here, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. I could talk about this all day, but maybe we should try and pull this together and say, what's next on your roadmap? Where
So
do you
I
take the
mentioned
story
I
from here?
mentioned it before. Yeah, I mentioned it before. So like distributed data mesh paradigm shift is one of the things that is always in my mind. I mean, I know it's been mentioned many times. Zamak is like it's like I followed there. I did some trainings as well. I mean, I'm not a data person. I don't have a background in data, but definitely I know that that's the key of the future. Like that's an area. That's so. I mean, I always say software is important, but without data is nothing. Like what data alone, they're already an amazing value. So that's the area where you should invest. And again, I've been there before. I've been working in places where data was a separate silo. So all the software teams were producing software, producing data, and then throwing them to a data warehouse or then a data lake. And there were different evolutions. And there was a separate team that asynchronously analyzing, manipulating, transforming the data, and giving back then feedback, right? So, and again, this is too slow. It's not enough. It's not enough,
Yeah.
especially now that I mean, even machine learning. While when I studied it 25 years ago was, I mean, something batch, very slow, very separate. Machine learning model now they can be trained and used almost real time. Some of them,
Yeah.
right? So saying that this is all a separate silo, I think it's just wrong, right? So what we're trying to do here, we're trying to involve in the again streamline team also data people. At the moment, data analysts, but next step is to start hiring again. Now that we control the data, start hiring data engineer and data scientists, but put them inside the team because again, if you're able to start investigating and using the data as soon as the data is produced, you'll be quicker than your competitor. That's definitely it's no brainer in this. Like
Yeah.
so, and also if the data part of the data team is inside the streamline team, this means that they will know the domain already. While instead, what happened in the past is that every team was producing data, throwing them to the data team, and then they had to pass the knowledge of the domain all the time. If there is a new table, if there are new fields, new entities, you need to pass the knowledge all the time to a team that has to have the knowledge of everything, which is impossible, right? Cognitive load
Mm.
is limited. While instead, if you have like a distributed data mesh in your architecture, baked by maybe Kafka, right? And then your team, again, back to Conway's law, matches this design by having data people inside the delivery team, you'll be able to have a distributed data mesh. And not only that, but you'll be able to give value to the data almost real time instead of having to wait, right? So this is definitely the next step. And I
Mm.
mean, Kafka and Confluent will be completely partner and part of it.
Well, I'm glad we can be. And I hope we have you back on the show in a year or two, and you can give us an update.
Oh, for sure, for sure. We can
Cool.
plan it in a year. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say.
I get the feeling you'll accomplish a lot in the coming year. Domenico, thank you so much for
Thanks.
talking to us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's been a pleasure for me. Thanks for inviting me.
Cheers. Well, there you are. That kind of business transformation, it's a hell of a magic trick. I can see how it's done, but I'm still impressed. You have to somehow free up your data, and then it ends up serving you in ways you don't even expect when you get started. And all the while you've got this balancing act of having a long-term plan, but unless you're delivering something worthwhile today, there won't be a long-term to plan for. I've got to admit, I kind of envy Dom. I think that's a heck of a journey to be on. And I really hope he comes back in a year or so and gives us an update. But before we go, let me remind you that if you want to learn more about event-driven architectures, we'll teach you everything we know at Confluent Developer. That's developer.confluent.io. If you're a beginner, we have getting started guides, and if you want to learn more, there are blog posts, recipes, in-depth courses. And if you take one of those courses, you can follow along easily by setting up a Confluent Cloud account. If you do, make sure you register with the code PODCAST100, and we'll give you $100 of extra free credit. If you liked today's episode, then please give it a like or a star or a share or whatever buttons you have on your user interface. And if you have a comment or want to get in touch, please do. If you're listening to this, you'll find our contact details in the show notes. And if you're watching, there are links in the description and the comment box down there, so you can use that. Find me on Twitter if you want to talk to me directly. And with that, it just remains for me to give huge thanks to Domenico Fioravante for joining us, and you for listening. I've been your host, Chris Jenkins. I'll catch you next time.